Taoiseach, the government decision that students will not have choice this year for their Leaving Cert is an appalling decision. It's a massive mistake, Taoiseach, not to allow a hybrid model or a blended model and to give a choice to students between traditional exams and calculated grades. Can I say furthermore that the way in which this decision was communicated was equally awful, cynically leaked to the media late last night. So stressed out students who had waited for months for government to make a decision find out through social media or from a WhatsApp message that the die had been cast. An incredible level of disrespect has been shown to these young people. Their voices have been ignored and set aside, and I believe government has failed fundamentally to understand the level of disruption that they have been subjected to. Fairness is the victim in all of this. Students have been very coherently calling for choice, for a blended approach, because it makes sense, because it is fair. This year's Leaving Cert students have had their entire senior cycle disrupted, 5th year and 6th year, by COVID-19. They've had to overcome massive academic challenges, and that is before we even consider the incredible pressure on their mental health. Students faced 2 months of full closures last year. They had out-of-class education, which is not comparable to in-classroom learning. Many struggled with the lack of devices, with Wi-Fi connection issues, and on top of all of that, they had the stress as young people living through a global pandemic. There were high levels of absence of students and teachers because of self-isolation and infection. That's had a massive impact, and to this day, Taoiseach, that has an impact in the classroom. The ISSU survey of over 40,000 students, in that survey, almost half of them reported that they had missed between 1 and 3 classes on average per day. That disruption continues still. And we know there have been huge problems with substitute cover. Indeed, in some schools, mock exams have been pushed back because the students are far behind. Now, none of this should be swept under the carpet. Students want choice. And this is what happened last year, and we know that a huge number of students, when given choice, chose to sit the traditional exam, but they also had the calculated grade. We know that COVID has affected different schools, different students, different teachers in different subjects in very different ways. And additional options simply within a paper don't fairly compensate for all of that. It's obvious that what we need here is a choice that affords the written exam but also calculated grades. And none of this is plain sailing, Taoiseach. We know there are challenges in this, but I don't accept that any of the challenges are insurmountable. Is cinna fása é leanach do raig le harteis de merach tradiisiúnta, chur sias teach mór vic léin le gáblion anús, tas tíon rawa uhu, tas tíon arteis de merach hybrid uhu. Taoiseach, government has made the wrong call, and I am asking you now, in fact, I am appealing to you now, on behalf of every Leaving Cert student, to do the fair thing. And the fair thing is to give students choice.
First of all, I want to thank the Deputy for raising this issue. And last week, I was asked similar questions in relation to this, and the most pressing demand, correctly in my view, from members of the opposition, and indeed generally, was for clarity and certainty as early as possible for students. Students were uppermost and the primary concern of government in reaching the decision that it reached. And the Minister, in her engagement with students, and indeed with parents and teachers and school management bodies and others, was asked primarily by students to deal with 4 issues and respond to 4 issues. One was that need for clarity and certainty. The second was greater choice within the examination, both written and oral and practical. Third was grade inflation, that the students of 2022 would not be disadvantaged as opposed to those who sat in 2021, who sat the Leaving Certificate. And the fourth was accredited grades, that they wanted that option between accredited grades and a written Leaving Certificate exam. Now, first of all, it has been a very challenging year for students. I acknowledge that, with COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on the learning environment. One of the biggest challenges this year to an accredited grade system, it could not have been applied as fairly as it was last year, because 25% of the students did not do the junior certificate. So their data would not have been available for an accredited grades alternative. I haven't seen anybody put forward an alternative to that in any meaningful way. No, I haven't. And this is important because we would be developing an alternative system that would not be using the students' own data, which was used last year, their own data. It's very important in terms of comparability and standardization. So the Minister has now opted to give very, very wide choice in the both written examinations, to such an extent that most papers will have content cut by a third in their papers. And students should look to the paper of 2021 in terms of a guide, and also there will be full details in terms of syllabus and so on published in the coming days by the State Examination Commission. And so, for example, in maths, in summary, in mathematics, on each paper, instead of having to answer all 10 questions, candidates will only have to answer 6. In biology, the additional choice through additional questions, candidates have to answer only 8 instead of 11 questions, and can furthermore focus on a reduced range of mandatory activities. In English Paper 1, candidates will have to answer only half of the amount of comprehending questions as usual, while, as would have been the case, and in English Paper 2, they only have to answer on any 2 instead of on all 3 sections, a reduction of 1/3. These are dramatically different. It represents a dramatically widening of choice compared to those who would have sat in 2019 or indeed who sat in 2018. So I don't think people should understate the significance of the adjustments to the paper and to the orals and practicals that are being made. And then you had the accredited games. Ní raibh éin róig an rialtas in nóiríre, mar ní raibh bhí chóras eile ó thaobh accredited grades, bhí sé dóthaíonta. Agus ní bheadh sé fearáilte das na mic léinn go háirithe. It would not have been fair to the students, primarily, to have pursued. I remember pursued the accredited grades option. I remember here last year, everybody really angry about the concept or prospect of historic profiling of schools as a basis for an accredited grade system. Collectively, it was taken out of such a system. And therefore, you know, it's in challenging times without question in terms of COVID-19. But we have given that certainty and and clarity as early as we possibly can, much earlier than last year, in line with what people were asking us to do last week.
Deputy MacDonald.
Well, Taoiseach, what students have asked for, and they have been consistent on this point, was choice, which meant a choice between a traditional exam in whatever form and calculated grades. That was deemed appropriate and necessary last year because of the COVID disruption. And the truth is that this year's Leaving Certificate students have been similarly disrupted. 5th year and 6th year, huge disruption to their learning. And if you listened to what the students are telling you, you would be left in no doubt that when they asked the Minister for choice, that is what they meant. And yes, they wanted clarity, they wanted a clear expression from government that they had been heard and that fairness would guide the decision of government. Nothing you have said to me there explains away the fact that you have failed to give that choice to our students. So I want to say to you again, the students have been through an incredible disruption. This has had an effect, as you have conceded, on their learning. It has also had a deep effect on so many of them personally. They have asked you, they have asked government to simply be as fair with them this year as you were with students last year. So I appeal to you again, Taoiseach, this is the wrong decision, and I invite you and the Minister to reverse it in the interests of those students.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
The Minister met the students on quite a number of occasions and engaged with the students. There were 4 requests. I've gone through the 4. The Minister has been able to respond very positively to 3 of those 4. The 4th on accredited grades, it simply was not possible. Now, I did say to you, and I did explain to you, which you know well, that there's a huge challenge to the accredited grades option because of the fact that 25% of this year's leaving cert. You didn't spell them out. I haven't heard them from you in 3 weeks. You keep pointing to your colleague.
Yeah, he's our spokesperson on education.
Look, I didn't interrupt. The bottom line, I have not got a coherent, cogent
There's assessment tools that are used in the north.
In the last 3 weeks, in relation to that core point, because I accept.
But you're not the Minister for Education.
I accept what people said.
The Minister for Education has the option.
The issue was raised in the House in the last while, and the point I'm making is that there is a huge issue there. People don't want historic profiling, in other words, that your results will be based on previous students in schools. Nobody wants that. Yeah. And that was the collective view here.
That's correct.
So there's a real challenge in terms of the 25%. It couldn't have been done as fairly as it was done last year. That's the point. Actually, elsewhere, every other European jurisdiction, from what I know, and the UK, are now going back to the pre-pandemic assessment approaches that they had. No one is actually, they're going back to their pre-COVID assessment.
Thank you very much.
So we're not out of line with what's happening across Europe and the United Kingdom.